Hey everyone, it's Andrew. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we can add a battlefield to our XGrid setup. We want to do this so that we can have a place where cinematic combat can happen when two units on the map are fighting. So this battlefield that we're making will be one of many battlefields that we'll make for this level, and each one can represent a different environment or section of the level. That way all of the different areas in your level have a place where the units can fight such that it reflects that specific area. So let's go ahead and get started. It is really easy. First of all, this is our setup that we have right now. This is similar to what we left off with in the last tutorial. So we have two units that are fighting on a map right now. It's kind of set up like this. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create a battlefield. And what we'll do is we'll just take this block that we have right here that we're using for the grid, and we'll copy it. We'll drag it over here. We're just going to really quickly set up a battlefield over here. And that way when these two fight, they'll have a space where they will be transported to in order to show the cinematic attack sequences that happen between the two characters. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and navigate to the cinematic combat folder. And we're going to need a couple of different things from this folder. The first thing that we're going to need is the cinematic combat manager, the cinematic manager blueprint here. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag that out into the world. And the good news is that we only have to touch this blueprint a little bit. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and move on to the next one that we'll need, which is the battlefield. Again, you can put this anywhere. I like to put it kind of next to the battlefield that it's going to be representing. Again, these are mostly just logic blueprints, so where they are in the world doesn't make too much of a difference. In the name editor here, I'll go ahead and rename this to the default battlefield, and that way I'm able to keep track of this battlefield as I'm developing it. So the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and grab Cinematic Attacker, and I'm going to go ahead and go down a little bit into this level, and I'm going to try and approximately put it in the center here. Again, you can have this however you'd like inside of your level. This is basically just going to be where the attacking unit is going to spawn on your battlefield. And likewise, I'll go ahead and grab a cinematic defender. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it so that these two are facing each other on opposite ends of the battlefield. And I just want to check really quick that these are kind of lined up. That looks pretty good to me. Maybe I move this one back so it's a little bit more symmetrical. And this looks fine. And the important part is that these arrows that I see here are facing each other. These little red arrows that aren't necessarily the movement axis stuff, but they're I put these arrows in here so that you could easily see which direction the actors are facing. Okay, so now that we have our combatant spawn zone set up, we have our battlefield, and we have our manager. Manager is off somewhere. Yeah. Cinematic manager is, oh, it's up here. I put it up here. Okay, cool. So these are the four main things that we need in order to set up a battlefield. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and configure these four, and then we're going to place a couple cameras afterwards. But first things first, we'll go ahead and grab this cinematic manager, and you'll see under this little default tab here, I'm in the details view of the cinematic manager, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a battlefield. I'm going to add the default battlefield here. Okay, so now the manager has an array that keeps track of all the different battlefields that you've made for that level, and now this default battlefield is one of those. All right, so now that that's set up, I'm going to go ahead and click on the default battlefield itself. I'm going to associate the cinematic manager with it here, and I'm also going to go ahead and associate the cinematic attacker and the cinematic defender with this battlefield. Before I do that, I want to rename this to maybe default cinematic attacker and default cinematic defender. It can be good to group your actors that are all associated with the same battlefield together, either by name or by organization here in the outliner. So let's go ahead and name this default cinematic attacker and default cinematic defender. All right, that looks pretty good. So again, I'll go back to my default battlefield. I'll choose the default cinematic attacker and the default cinematic defender. And I'll go ahead and give this battlefield a name. I'll call it Battlefield 1. Cool. And this is mostly for debugging, so if you find yourself wanting to expand upon any of the blueprint code that controls this stuff, giving it a name will help you be able to print out its identifying features so that you can debug it if you decide you want to extend it. Okay, so next up we have some cameras that we want to place. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and grab a cinematic camera, BP cinematic camera from the XGrid folder. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. I'm going to go ahead and pilot it. Let's see, pilot it. And I'm going to try and get a angle that's kind of aligned, giving a little view of the battlefield from the side of the attacker over here. You can put these cameras, again, anywhere you want. Where you place them is going to determine the default setup if you don't have any cinematic sequence defined for your specific characters. But if you do have a cinematic sequence behind these cameras are going to snap to your characters and follow them and do whatever you program them to do inside of your cinematic sequences. So it doesn't matter too much where you set these up. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this one up here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit escape here. And if I take a look over there, I can see my first cinematic camera is set up. I'll go ahead and go back to my battlefield. And down here where we have cameras, I'm going to set the cinematic attack camera to be this one right here. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for the cinematic defender camera. I'm going to go ahead and grab another cinematic camera. And I'm going to go ahead and pilot this one as well. And again, I'm just going to position it somewhere that kind of looks like it's from the defender's point of view. Again, if you have a cinematic sequence set up, this won't matter too much what the positioning is, since the positioning of the camera once the sequence starts is controlled by the character's sequence script. So don't worry too much about where you're placing this one. I'm just trying to get a general location here, and looks like I've achieved that, so I'll go ahead and stop piloting this one. And this is our basic setup, right? So I have my first cinematic camera over here from the attacker's point of view. The defender's one is over here. Actually, I might try and make these a little bit more. Just a little bit more looking down on the battlefield, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my battlefield now, and I'll assign the second cinematic camera down here. I might actually take a second and give these cameras names. So instead of BP cinematic camera, I might call this the default cinematic camera. And for the attacker, and I'll go ahead and grab my other one, cinematic camera number 2, and I'll call this default cinematic camera for our attacker. All right, awesome. So we're looking good. Oh, sorry, for our defender. All right, so if I go back to my battlefield, I'll go ahead and select this camera here, the default cinematic camera for the defender as the defender camera, and the default cinematic camera attacker for the attacker camera. All right, so the last thing that we're going to want to do is make sure that our units are in line with the combat sequences that we've scripted for them. So what that means is that we need to place the distances of these two actors here in accordance with whatever it is, whatever distance you're working with for your game. So the default XGrid framework uses a running distance of about 12.5 meters as the distance between the two units, and the cinematic sequences that are with the default package are tailored to use this specific distance in order to have the smoothest possible animations and sequencing with their attacks and their jumps and all of that stuff. So let's go ahead and position these two actors 12.5 meters apart. So let's go ahead and figure out how what position we should put these two in so that the animations in the sequences are lined up correctly. So I'll go ahead and place this actor over here at 1000, and I'll place this one over here at negative 250. So this is about 12.5 meters apart. Let's see if I can get them both onto the level. I might need to just extend the level out a little bit. That looks fine. And there we go. And just a little side note here, when you're making your own cinematic sequences, which we'll cover in the next tutorial video, we'll be talking about how to establish what this distance between the units should be. Whatever you decide to go with will work. It's just worth deciding beforehand how far you want your units to be apart during the cinematic sequences. Okay, so the last thing we're going to want to do is to actually enable cinematic combat for this XGrid instance. And we can do that by going to the XGrid folder and navigating to databases and finding this use cinematic combat table. And we can simply click this checkbox here, enable cinematic combat, and that will switch the primary combat mode to use cinematic over grid-based combat. And let's go ahead and close out of that and save our project. All right, so that should be the last step. Let's go ahead and hit play and see what it looks like. So we should have our character Sharp here doing his attack animation here and then jumping back and landing in his starting position, and then the attack sequence finishes up. All right, excellent. So that's the end of this tutorial. We were just setting up an example battlefield. In the next one, we'll go over how we can configure our units to have these specific combat sequences, what goes into them, and what the necessary components in the code are in order to set up sort of just a minimal combat sequence for one of our units. That's all for now. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.